bookreading-gapcreek-chapter5-3. When Freight came back from the army and we got married, we didn't have $1 between us. We took up housekeeping in the cabin on Painter Mountain without a horse or a cow. For a long time, I cooked soup in the washpan. We had to borrow Faith's steady horse just to break a garden. I had to make coffee in the water bucket, and everybody else was near about as poor. I had not heard Ma talk so much. It was the sweet tenderloin and grits and coffee making her feel better than herself. Her tongue was loosened and soft. For 10 years after the war, you couldn't find a nickel, I said. People traded work and paid each other in kind. I finally got me half a dozen hens. It was their eggs I traded for coffee and sugar. We didn't have nothing else but what we raised. When Dave come along, we still we didn't have nothing else but what we raised. When Dave come along, we still didn't have a car. By the time Hank was born, the worst was over. Hank said he was born little, I said. Didn't weigh much more than 2 pounds. Ma said he come almost 2 months early. It's a miracle he ever lived. She took another slice of tenderloin and a sip of coffee, and she buttered a biscuit. Nobody expected him to leave. I don't reckon he ever would have except for the sugar tit. What kind of sugar tit? I said. It was just a rag dipped in milk or dippled in honey. We'd let him suck on. I sucked it in a little chicken broth and let him suck it. That's what kept him alive. He was the littlest of my young guns, and he was grown up to be the biggest man. I've known it to happen with dogs, Mr. Pendergast said. The luntiest of litter will grow into the biggest of the pack. The Lord has his own way of doing things, Ma said. Hank sure don't look like a runt, I said. I spoiled Hank because he was so little, Ma said. I fed him better and never made him work hard as the other boys. That's why he growed up so big. Hank works hard, I said. He works hard, but he don't finish what he starts, Ma said. He loses his temper too easy. The hard work is staying with a job till it's done. I wanted to stand up for Hank, but I didn't know what to say. Ma Richard had known him longer than I had, and I didn't want to argue while we were eating. Hank is working mighty hard and the brick killing, I said, and we were working mighty hard at hog killing, Ma Richard said. I don't know what brought us together in such a fine fellowship unless it was just the tenderloin and grits and coffee and maybe the work of hog killing, but it was like we formed a special kinship in the kitchen at the table piled with tubs and dishpans full of pork fat. Maybe it was the tiredness that made me a little light-headed and the prospect of all the work ahead. If there's anything better than fresh tenderloin, the good Lord kept it for himself, Mr. Pendergast said, like it was something he had said before, but like all familiar saying, it had truth in it. The good Lord made the world so we could earn our joy, Ma said, but it's no guarantee we'll ever be happy. There's no guarantee of anything except we are going to die, Mr. Pendergast said. Let's start rendering lard, I said. It was time to get to work. The sun was halfway down the sky, and Ma had only started dicing up the fat. I carried our plate out to the back porch, where I'd wash them later, and then I got a paring knife and sharpened it on the stone Hank kept beside his laser straw. You cut up fat by slicing it in slabs, and the slab you put on a board and slice 10 times one way, and then 10 times the other. That way, you end up with little boxes of fat that will cook down quicker than big chunks. With the knife as sharp as I could make it, I started cutting. I drove the blade through the white jelly flesh again and again, and as soon as I had the little pieces cut, I scooped them up and dumped them in the canner. After the canner was mostly full, I set it on the cook stove, which was already hot. Then I threw more wood in the stove and started cutting up more fat. I figured there would be 3 full canners to render down. That would give us maybe 10 buckets of lard and enough crackling bread all winter. Now, when hot fat begins to heat up, the little cubes start to be sweet. They get bright with oil drops and glisten as they melt. The oil just melts out of them and pot steams and bubbles. It comes to boil. Ain't nothing dangerous as rendering lard because of all that hard grease on the stove. A pot gets tipped over, it will burn you up. If the grease falls in the fire, it will explode. You know the saying, the fat is in the fire. Fat will flare up like kerosene. But the main thing I worried about was getting burned by the grease. For sometimes a can of rendering lard will spit out a gut and burn you. Or if you knocked the pot, it will splash an hour out faster than boiling water and burn you alive. I have been rendering lard every year with Mama, and I know how uneasy boiling grease was. Set the canner further back on the stove, Marita said. All the good feeling from the dinner table was gone from her voice. I've got to leave room to set the other one on, I said. You won't need room in that tips over on you, Ma snapped. She had changed back to her old self. Instead of answering, I started carving up more fat at the table. I slide 20 times this way and 20 times crossways. The fat sliced easy as clotted cream or thick jelly. My left hand was so slick with grease I couldn't pick up anything but the blocks of fat. I racked the knife across the board harder than I needed to show how determined I was to get the job done and ignore Ma. There was a little blood on the fat and on the board also, and I hardly noticed when I felt the nip at the end of my middle finger as I held the slab down to slice it. But when I saw the bright blood on the white fat, I know I caught myself. A drop fell from the end of my finger, and then another. Oh no, I said. What have you done? Ma said. Just a nick, I said. Don't get blood on the lard fat, Ma said. I grabbed the dishcloth and wiped the grease off my finger. I'd cut a place on the tip about the size of the pinhead, but it kept bleeding bright red drops. I cleaned up the left hand with the cloth and tore a strip from a flesh linen rag. I bound up the finger as best I could to stop the bleeding. That's what comes of being in a hurry, Ma said. I will have to be more careful, I said. I wasn't going to take the time to get mad at Ma, and I wasn't going to stoop to the level of her snidiness. With the bandage on my finger, I finished slicing up the second pan of fat and then lugged the heavy canner to the top of the stove. But as I slid the container onto the steep stovetop, I pushed it too far to the right and hit the canner already there. The boiling fat rocked like a wave had been sent through it. I backed away and seen a tongue of boiling lard speed up and over the rim as the wave sloshed on the side of the canner. The flung grease hissed on the stove top and turned to cracking bubbles and smoke. But there must have been enough grease too that some of it busted into flame. For I seen fire on top of the stove that might not have amounted to nothing except the rocking and sloshing continued in the canner, and the hot oil spit out again and leaped right into the flames. With a whoosh, the fire flared on the stove top. I think it would still have been all right and just burned there, sizzling on the metal, except a little more grease sloshed out the pot, and the fire caught onto the dot and followed the splash back into the pot. That was when the fire blazed up in the canner itself. All the hot oil caught at once, and flames jumped to the ceiling, lighting the kitchen. Oh my God, Ma said. I looked around for something to throw on the flame. There wasn't a blanket or quilt anywhere. There wasn't anything bigger than a dish towel. Now a grease fire is a worse kind of fire than usual. A grease fire hisses and jumped off from one spot to another. There was grease all over the stove and all over the kitchen. The flames started from one spot to another. I ran out to the back porch and got the water bucket. I'd heard that throwing water on boiling grease is worst thing you can do. I hollered for her to stop, but she flung the bucket of water right into the flaming pot. You would think cold water would put a fire out, but the dousing exploded in a hiss and made a boiled lard splash in all directions. The flames followed the leap of the splash. The water just spread the fire. The flames landed on the second canner of the fat and on the dish pans full of fat on the table. The whole kitchen seemed to turn to the flames before my eyes. The curtains on the wall caught fire and heat blistered my face. We have to get out, I yelled to Mom. I pulled her toward the back door. Smoke was already thick. You couldn't see much but the flames in the kitchen. Mr. Pendergast come running in with another bucket of water. I guess he must have been to the spring. Don't throw it no water, I hollered, but he flung the water right onto the fire, making even more smoke and steam. I've got to get my money, he shouted. What money? I said. It was so hot I could barely stand in the doorway. My pension money, he yelled. You come back, I said, and grabbed in at his arm, but he had already jerked away. He dropped to the floor and crawled under the smoke. I knelt down where I could see out of the worst smoke and watched him work his way to the right of the stove. Get back here, I hollered. You better stop it, Ma screamed. I know Mr. Panda kept a can of kerosene sometimes used to start fires behind the stove, but I had forgot about it. He reached into the corner behind the wood box and brought out a pint jar, and I think he would have made it out except for the explosion that flared up behind the stove. It must have been the kerosene catching fire. I screamed as the flames covered Mr. Pendergast up. Let him go, Ma shouted. But I couldn't just leave Mr. Pendergast laying there in the fire. I had to try to help him. He was screaming and the fire seemed to be right on top of his head. Take his foot. I hollered to Ma, but she was already out the door and on the back steps, coughing and trying to get her breath. Grab hold of his foot, I said. I took a hold of Mr. Pendergast's feet and yanked as hard as I could, and he moved a little. I was coughing too and felt smothered from the smoke. I jerked harder and got Mr. Pendergast halfway out the door, and then Ma took one of his feet and helped me to pull him onto the porch. Mr. Pendergast's hair was burning, and part of his shirt was burning, and I didn't have nothing but my apron, and I put my apron over his hair and snuffed out the flames. I burned my hand a little, but got the fire out. And just then Ma brought a bucket of water still warm from the washpot and threw it on his shirt. We rolled Mr. Pendergast over on the wet porch and seen how bad his face and forehead was burned. The skin looked black and on his forehead and scalp where his hair had been. His eyebrows was burned off and the skin on his cheeks looked red and peeling and bloody in places under the suit. I was thinking we had to put something on his face and on his back where his shirt had burned. What you put on burns is butter or lard or some other kind of grease or oil. There was butter in the spring house, but the lard was burning up in the kitchen. And then I thought, no, I'd better try to put the fire out first. If I can, I got to save the house. I stood up and looked in the door. You stay out of there, Master Richard Holler. Nothing you can do. Smoke poured out the door and out the window. You couldn't see nothing in the kitchen. I couldn't even see any flames. That made me think nothing was burning but the lard, and maybe that could be put out. I looked around the porch and seen a pile of tall sacks by the hose and shovel and mattock. They had been used, I guess, for taking corn to mill or carrying leaves to put in cow stalls. I grabbed up 8 or 10 sacks and run to the wash pot. What are you doing? My Richard called. Putting out the fire. I hollered back. I plunged the sacks into the pot and pulled them out, streaming warm water. With my arms around the dipping sacks, I ran toward the back door. You stay out of there, Ma yelled. I leaped up the steps and ran past Mr. Pendergast into the smoking kitchen. The smoke was so thick I couldn't see much. Bending close to the floor, I walked to the stove and threw the wet sacks on the burning canard. And then the smoke boiled up worse, and I could hardly see what I was doing. I ran back out to the pile of sacks and got 8 or 9 more and carried them to the wash pot. You stay up there, Ma screamed, but I didn't pay no attention to her. I carried the hot, dripping sacks against my chest and hurried through the back door. I figured if the house could be saved, I had to try. I started the fire and I had to stop it. I stepped across Mr. Pendergast laying on the porch. He was starting to wake up from the smoke one and hollering. Fighting my way into the smoke, holding my breath and bending down low as I could, I put sacks on the burning grease on the table. I flung sacks